Hey, you don't know me, but you're probably unfamiliar with throwable weapons in Fallout New Vegas. Aside from the throwing spears that come from the DLC packs, you've likely only used throwing weapons sparingly outside of dynamite or grenades. However, today I decided to pick what's probably the worst throwing weapon in the game. Can I beat Fallout New Vegas with only throwing knives? Before we begin, let's go over the rules. First, I can only use throwing knives to handle fighting. I can use other weapons to sell off, though. Second, I cannot use any companions to fight for me, as that would invalidate the difficulty of using a single weapon in my challenge. I can, however, use them to fulfill any purpose outside of combat, such as with quests, which I actually did for this run. And thirdly, I must complete any GRA challenges that this weapon has, which, for the throwing knives, is the You Don't Belong in This World challenge, where I have to kill 10 abominations. And with that, let's begin the run. I rose from the dead thanks to the efforts of Dr. Mitchell. I was shot in the head, so I am going to make sure that I get my revenge. I named myself Lunch, and made my character pink-haired, and then decided my special stats. I honestly didn't really know what a throwable weapons build would look like. I mainly min-maxed what stats I knew would be good. Strength was at 8, heat for high damage, perception was at 6 so that I could get some perks I thought would be good, endurance and charisma were both dumb stats because I figured I wouldn't need them for the stealth build I was making, intelligence was at 8 for skill points obviously, agility was 7 because I thought that having high agility would make thrown weapons better in some way, and lastly, luck was at 9 to give a boost to all stats, give better crit chances, and to make me unstoppable at the blackjack table. For my tag skills, I picked melee weapons, sneak, and speech. Melee weapons and sneak were pretty obvious, but speech was for a specific interaction, as well as a failsafe in case the scarcity of throwing knives comes to bite me in the butt. Lastly, for my traits, I picked skilled, as always, and small frame to give me an additional point in agility. In case you were wondering, I didn't pick heavy-handed or loose cannon because they were antithetical to the build. Stealth builds are entirely based around getting critical hits and sneak attacks, so gaining 20% extra base damage in exchange for 60% less critical damage would be less than ideal. And loose cannon's upside, on the other hand, was less useful when you consider that throwing knives already have the fastest attack speed of all thrown weapons, so limiting its range is a bad idea. After removing the DLC items, I was ready to head on out. Now you might be wondering, where does one get throwing knives? Well, I'm glad you asked. There are 5 total locations where throwing knives can be bought. Blake in the Crimson Caravan, Chet from Good Springs, Mick from Mick and Ralph's, Quartermaster Baron and Hoover Dams, and lastly, the Great Khan Armorer will all sell throwing knives on occasion. Notice that last part. They sell throwing knives on occasion, meaning that every time that they restock, there's a chance they won't have anything in stock, meaning that I'll have to return next time for another chance. Back to the game. I checked Chet up to see if he had any throwing knives. Of course, in Chet fashion, he didn't, so I headed out on the road. However, instead of the intended path like I did last time, I decided to make a beeline for the strip. I stopped by Sloan and then made my way to the Deathclaw-infested mountains. The trick is to stick to the rocky walls. As long as you stayed upwind them, the Deathclaws have no way of getting to you. Even if they spotted you, they aren't programmed to climb mountains, so you'll be fine. Once I got out of Deathclaw territory, I sprinted across the wasteland to Mick and Ralph's. Once I arrived, I talked to Mick, and thanks to tagging the speech kill and wearing a vault uniform, I had just enough speech to gain access to his private stash. Here, he held the most amount of throwing knives I ever saw at once, at any vendor. 15. Fortunately, after buying them, I ended up wasting one on Dixon after trying to jump in the crevice behind him and to pickpocket him. I ended up glitching into the window and having to use the commands to get out of that one. I used another 3 on a 3-side thug to see what I was working with, and it took all 3 of those knives to kill him. Then I went back to Good Springs to get started on the tutorial with Sunny, but when you had to knock over the empty bottles that she put on the fence, I couldn't progress. I tried throwing my knives at them, but Sunny decided not to count them. So I decided to ask around for various vendors that I knew. Chet would sometimes have none, Mick was the same, and Blake never had any auto. Started to get worried. I thought about how these knives would add up and how I would have to be able to pay for them all. Then I remembered my luck stat of 9, and I made a quick trip to the Atomic Wrangler, leveled up to 2 from playing Blackjack, took the Black Widow perk to deal an extra 10% damage to all men because they deserve it, and then got banned from the Atomic Wrangler. I then submitted my credit check to the TV head at the Strip and headed towards the Tops Casino for an extra 900 EXP just from looking at Benny. I jumped to level 4 and took the Educated perk for extra skill points later down the line. Then I went back to my old habits of waiting 4 days and checking on each of my sources for throwing knives. At this point, I was starting to get a bit out of it. If I only had a handful of knives and never threw them at anyone, this would end up more akin to a pacifist run than a weapon-restricted one. So I decided to try opening up the last 2 possible sources of throwing knives. There's just one problem. Barton and the Great Khan's armor both won't sell it to me, given my current relation to their respective factions. Great Khan's armor won't sell to me unless I am at least considered accepted by the Khans. Barton also has this requirement for the NCR, but I also have to pass a 50-point speech check. So how was I going to get in the good graces of both factions at once? Boulder City. At Boulder City, I paid off the NCR so that the Great Khans could walk free. That got me accepted by the Great Khans, but not by the NCR. Dread. No matter, there are more ways to get the NCR to like me. I decided to check on the Great Khan armor, who, fun fact, is not at Red Rock Canyon, but instead is in the basement of a ruined house nearby at Spring Mountain Ranch State Park. Doesn't matter, she didn't have any throwing knives on her either, and after a couple more visits to her, I decided not to try her anymore because of the mantises that kept chasing me around that place. Also, while I was cycling through vendors, I spotted a fiend that was attacking the guards outside of the Crimson Caravan Company. She then turned around and started firing at me. I tried to flee inside the company building, but she followed me inside and killed Blake. I'm starting to get angry. Whatever, I decided to go back to the Lucky 38, turned in a snow globe for caps, and got invited to Ambassador Crocker's house for an assignment. Then I went back to the Tops. Inside the Tops, I talked to Swank and convinced him to let me have a private audience with Benny. I then confronted Benny. My first attempt, I didn't have enough knives to split his square-headed skull in 2, so he shot my head off instead with Maria. I tried again, this time not letting him talk, and getting a sneak attack crit, which left me one singular knife left. Leaving the Tops, I went back to the Lucky 38, bugged Mr. House's network for a scientist, and leveled up to level 6, and then I took the Heave-Ho perk. Now, the high knives are not only faster, but also have a much longer trajectory. I then talked to Ambassador Crocker, and I honestly thought that he would make me deal with the Kings first, but instead he wanted me to deal with the Boomers. So, not wanting to do their quest line yet, I went all the way down to the Mojave Outpost, took Ranger Coast's quest to investigate Nipton, went to Nipkin, killed Oliver Swanwick, and got told what happened there by Volpez. I then went back to Ranger Ghost and found out that I didn't get enough reputation to be accepted. Not seeing any other options, I decided to go to the Boomers' place. Dodging their artillery was difficult, but luckily, stim packs come in handy. After shooting at me with missiles, they let me inside their base, and now I have to go around helping them out. First, I visited their medical center and found out that I could only help out one of them inside. I then visited the little kid who talks about his people's history, and then I asked him some extra questions for extra fame. I did the ant clearing quest, using a sonic sound emitter to clear out all the ants. This counts, shut up, it's part of the quest. Then I went to the gunrunners to buy a shit ton of missiles. Talked to the woman whose name I don't care enough to look up, and dropped all my missiles off to make the Boomers idolize me. After raising the bomber from its watery grave, Pearl, their leader, told me that they'd fight for me. I then reported back to Crocker, became level 8, and took the Cowboy perk for an extra 25% damage boost. I then went back to check my final source for throwing knives. I then ran all the way to Hoover Dam, checked with Quartermaster Barton, and found no throwing knives on him. I then went through at least 5 cycles of checking to see if he had any throwing knives on him, and nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was at this point I decided to pull out the action replay.
That's right, we're gonna cheat.
I decided that instead of losing my mind attempting to slowly amass a few throwing knives and end up wasting most of them, instead I decided anytime I need more knives, I'd use console commands to give me a massive amount of throwing knives and then take away my caps afterwards. If you think that this disqualifies the run, please note, I am technically not doing anything I couldn't before without a lot of grinding. It's not like I was raising all of my special stats to 10 and activating God mode. All of this is just for convenience on my end. Back to the game, I gave myself 100 throwing knives for 3,000 caps total. I also decided that completing the You Don't Belong in This World GRA challenge for the throwing knives was my top priority now. I was not allowed to do anything that didn't advance completing that challenge in any sort of way. Not only that, but I was also going to end it off by killing a Deathclaw. So I decided to start hunting some abominations, starting with Mr. House. After pawning off 2 more stove clones to his robot lover, I took a trip down Mr. House's basement and killed the old bastard. I then decided to take a trip to Hidden Valley and hunt some centaurs. After seeing a different kind of abomination along the way, I made it to the Crater of Pain. Here resided 4 disgusting centaurs, led by their inbred leader, Mo. These guys weren't much of a threat. Their vomited projectiles were slow, their bodies were big, fat, and ugly, and not even with 3 times the tongues on them could they ever hope to kill me. Honestly, the radiation-infected crater that they inhabited was more dangerous than they ever could be. So, after killing them once, I then went back to Hidden Valley, waited for 3 days, and then returned back to put them out of their misery again. Now, if you presumably were keeping track of all of these deaths via counting on your fingers, and presumably didn't lose or gain any digits since you were born, you have counted 9 out of the 10 abominations that I needed to kill. With one last abomination left, it was time to kill a Deathclaw. First, I got myself about 60 more knives before heading down to Quarry Junction to find my Deathclaw. I followed along the rocks to the west of the quarry entrance before climbing up on a pile of stones near an abandoned sentry post. On my vantage point, I searched the horizon for a Deathclaw to strike and spotted a Deathclaw. Or rather, the Deathclaw spotted me. He tried to charge at me, but he couldn't reach me on my pile of stones, so eventually he gave up and ran away to cry to his friends or something. No matter, I had my sights on a different Deathclaw on the horizon. This one was very far from my throwing knife's range, and I couldn't hit him. But by throwing one knife, I managed to catch his attention, and he ran directly towards me. Unlike his friend, however, he didn't have all his marbles. He ran directly towards me, but didn't realize that he couldn't climb over the ledge that separated us. Killing him now was like shooting fish in a barrel, if the fish took like 70 shots. But that doesn't matter. I managed to kill a Deathclaw at level 8, and I finally finished the You Don't Belong in This World challenge. Now, continuing on with the main quest, I reported back to Crocker, and he tells me that the Kings are causing problems for the NCR. He states that Pacer is the only string I need to cut, so I went inside the King's School of Impersonation, hid behind a doorway, killed one of the King's members who was in the way, then hid behind a desk that he was previously standing nearby to kill Pacer where he stood. Somehow though, despite being completely hidden, every single king knew I killed him, and when I reported back to Ambassador Crocker, he wasn't pleased with my results. I did end up losing a little reputation with the NCR because of this, but no matter, I'm not locked out of their quest line. Crocker told me to report back to Colonel Cassandra, and so I did. She wants me to deal with the Great Khans. So, at Rad Canyon, I talked to Papa Khan. He wasn't interested in an alliance, but his right-hand man, Reggie, hypothetically was. So I decided to make that hypothetical a reality by killing Papa. While he was eating, I snuck up behind him and stole his key. Then I waited until it was nighttime, hid in his bedroom, and waited for him to fall asleep. Despite delivering a sneak attack crit to the head, he survived with just a sliver of health. But not to worry, I just simply disarmed myself, and Papa Khan was willing to forgive me. That was his mistake. After carrying out another political assassination, I reported back to the colonel and told her that the Khans would fight for the NCR. Then she assigned me to investigate the Omertas due to suspicions of them collaborating with Caesar's Legion. She told me to ask Liz O'Malley, the secretary at the NCR embassy on the Strip, who then referred to me to the Omerta's receptionist. By the way, did you know that Liz has a 100 in guns, explosives, and melee weapons despite never having or using any weapons in-game? Makes me curious about her past. Anyhow, I talked to Omerta's receptionist and she told me that I have to talk to Caccino. But when I spoke to him, he was very standoffish and told me to fuck off or he'd burn me. Now I don't appreciate it when people talk to me like that, so I did a little pickpocketing on his person and found a little journal full of secret things he did against his own family. So I did a little extortion, and now he's telling me what I want to hear. Apparently, the Omerta's big boss, Big Sal, is planning on helping the Legion when they attack the Strip. We decided that we were going to put a stop to that. They then learned about this guy, Clandon. He seems like a nice fellow. Too nice. He apparently is some sort of contractor with the Omertas, but I knew that there was something hiding behind that smile of his, so I snuck into his room and gave him the old knife in the back of the head. So now we could just forget about him. I then told Caccino the good news, and now Big Sal wants to talk with us. So me and Caccino went inside his office. Now, Big Sal wasn't too happy about me messing with their operations, so they planned to pump me full of lead, but unfortunately for them, I had figured that out already. Which is why when they reached for the guns, they had nothing to shoot me with, so instead, they decided to go fisticuffs and ran at me. But I had my knives on me, so I was able to make them kaput. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. After reporting back to the Colonel, she then assigned me to wipe out the Brotherhood of Steel. First, I picked up Veronica at the 188 trading post, went to Hidden Valley, and entered the Brotherhood's bunker. From there, she helped me inside without having to wear an explosive collar, and once I was done with her, I set her free, and now it was time for business. I swiped the key cards off of Elder McNamara and Paladin Harbin. Scry Taggart, I decided to pop his head off before looting not only his key card, but also his robes. I then decided to take out his apprentice as well, before setting the place to blow. I then made my way out while also putting on Taggart's robes as a disguise. With the Brotherhood destroyed, the Colonel only had one thing left for me: protect President Kimball. Now this wasn't too hard. As the President was making his speech to the troops, I noticed a Ranger had fallen out of the nearby tower, so I decided to check it out, and lo and behold, a Legion spy. He wasn't too difficult to handle, although his armor made him tank a few of my knives before dying. Thanks to that, I leveled up to 10 and took the Finesse perk for an extra 5% chance of critting. All that was left was to finish the game at the Battle of Hoover Dam, but seeing as I was pretty close to leveling up again, I figured why not do the crazy quest before wrapping things up. At Black Mountain, I decided to give myself 346 throwing knives for the 10,300 caps that I had. This was a mistake. I was over-encumbered for most of this endeavor. The Nightkin and Super Mutants brutes weren't all so bad to deal with. There was one guy with an incinerator and the Annabelle Sniper Mutant that gave me some trouble, but the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Now, Tabitha herself was interesting. She kept rushing me with her super sledge, but all I had to do was use the brilliant maneuver of just stepping out of the way. In fact, I got so good at it that I was able to get into a rhythm before one of my knives somehow knocked her giant hammer from her hands, and she started socking me. But at that point, it was over for her, and Tabitha fell just like the mutants that followed her. Now with the additional level, I returned to Hoover Dam and started the final battle. General Oliver wanted me in his office. There I got an extra level up to level 12 and took the fast metabolism perk, and the general told me about making a move against the Legion. But then, some guy came in and said the Legion was attacking right now. They even breached the insides of the dam itself. So of course, I have to be the guy to beat the Legion's legate, Lanius. Not wanting to use up all my knives before fighting the legate, I ran past every single Legionnaire, leaving the troopers and rangers inside to deal with them. I continued doing this on the surface too. Eventually, I made it inside wannabe Roman's base. Now this legate fight was the most difficult thing I've ever done in New Vegas. If you saw my last video, I harped on about how General Oliver's boss fight was being pretty difficult on me, but let me tell you, that ain't got nothing on this fight. First of all, Legate Lanius fights you with all of his Praetorians fighting by his side. With the amount of knives that I had, I couldn't even dream of making a victory happen. I couldn't even make Lanius duel me himself because my speech skill was so low. But it did give me this scene that you're currently watching, so there's that. But, remember that level up I got before the entire assault? I did too. So I redid the entire assault, except this time when I leveled up at the start, I increased my speech shield just enough so that I could convince the Legate to duel me. Great. But there's another problem. I don't have enough knives to kill him. Even with the 80 knives that I had on me by the time I got to Legate, and even if I landed every single shot on him, the most I could do was what felt like a quarter of his health. So, I reset again, and this time before starting the whole assault, I took another trip to the strip and robbed the tops. Then, after selling everything I didn't need, I gave myself about 180 knives and removed half my caps for that. Then I bought myself more stim packs and redid the entire assault for a third time, this time tagging Bloody Mess to get as much damage as I could possibly squeeze out. Then when I finally got to the Legate, and after a couple more failed attempts where he caused me to fall over and combo me, I finally got a winning run. My entire strat had me more drugged up than a Russian athlete and eating more food than a mukbang YouTuber while the Legate was chasing me. I ran backwards, throwing knives at him, hoping that they would actually hit him instead of his giant frickin' sword, and using stim packs whenever he hit me. Eventually, after becoming God for a moment, I got him to his second phase where he briefly runs away before charging back, and at this point I think his swing speed was doubled. At this point, I knew that my drugs were off soon, so I was starting to panic. But luckily, John Fallout New Vegas gave me mercy. As I ran past a cart, the Legate found himself stuck, and I could take a moment to breathe. It was all too familiar now. I knew what to do. I threw knife after knife at him, whittling down what was left of his health. But then, as he came to just about 2 slithers of health, Lanius teleported out of his trap and started charging at me again. I ran backwards once more, keeping my blades flying in his direction until eventually, with one last throw of my knife, the Legate had fallen, his death by 1,000 cuts. Afterwards, General Oliver busted in and told me how good of a job I did, and yeah, I didn't care. I leveled up 3 times after that, but only got to add skill points for one of them, and the challenge was finally over. So, can I beat Fallout New Vegas with only throwing knives? Yeah, but boy was that last fight really tough. Although these knives make for excellent stealth kill weapons, especially if you are trying to kill someone in a crowded room and you need to find a specific spot to kill them with, I really wouldn't recommend dedicating yourself to them. Any opponent with actual armor and or health will always tank at least 7 of them, and you're only going to have a handful of them unless you did what I did with the console commands. Regardless, thanks for watching my video. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and leave a comment. It would really help out a first-time YouTuber like me. Feel free to leave any ideas you have for future videos, though I do want to say that my next challenge will not be on Fallout. But until then, I'm the Corruptist, and I'll see y'all next time.